You may, so that it'll be available for others or for yourself, and that will also give you access to the slides, the PowerPoint slides that will be presented today. So you can take your notes accordingly. I always wanted to know that in college, whether the slides would be available or not. So you can take your notes accordingly and you can revisit it. It likely will be on the Presbytery website today. We welcome all of you from all of your congregations as we all try and figure out what we possibly didn't think we would have to have figured out, which is the things that we do in January and February: ordaining elders, having congregational meetings, installing folks. So this is new for many of us. We ask that you hold your questions, hold your oral questions through Susan's presentation. There will be several breaks in order to answer any of your questions. We welcome you to use the chat. So if you have any questions, and I'm sure that you are all aware of this, but just in case, on the bottom of your screens, there's a little chat bubble. And if you click that on, you will be able to write your questions in the chat room, and we will certainly do our best to answer them. We do not anticipate that we will be here for any longer than an hour at the most. So in order to help plan your time, that's what we are anticipating. Other than that, Susan, I think that's it for introductions. What do you think?
That sounds good.
Okay,
I'm going to do
off.
in 2 parts. So if you're only wanting one part and it's the second part, I apologize ahead of time. I'm going to first talk about congregational meetings, and then I'm going to go on and talk about ordinations and installations. And I want to say at the beginning that I'm going to cover what is required by Robert's Rules or by the Book of Order, and I'm going to talk a little bit about procedures, but you know your congregations. And the way we do, for instance, a virtual presbytery meeting in Hudson River is very different than the way it's done in Southern New England or the way it's done in New York City, or the way. So you need to sort of tailor these to your congregation. Some of these things will work for them and some won't. And I'm going to talk about different ways to do virtual meetings, and you'll know which ones will work with your congregation and which one won't. So pay attention to the parts that will work. If there are questions afterwards about your specific congregation and how to make this work, I'm happy to talk with you about that outside of this meeting. And I'm sure if there are technical questions, since he's on the call around technology, Casey will also talk with you about how to make your conference call or your virtual screen meeting work. Just keep that in mind as we go through this. So let me get the PowerPoint up. And once it starts, I will not be able to see most of you. So Deb will alert me. I can see 5 people. So can you all see that? Good, thank you. So we're going to start with planning a virtual congregational meeting. And what I've done as I've thought through this is come up with the questions that I have gotten again and again from individuals who have written me in the last month or so saying, I need to know this for a congregational meeting. So the first question I've gotten a lot of now is, must I have my annual meeting, right? And does it have to be in January, or can I wait until we can be back face to face later in the year? And the answer to that is always, I say to you, what do your bylaws say? All right. You can have bylaws of 2 different kinds. You can have specific bylaws or general bylaws. If your bylaws say you must have a congregational meeting in January of the year, you've got to have a congregational meeting in January of the year. If it says you must have an annual meeting, you've got a lot more wiggle room, right? So if it's general, you can decide to defer until later if you want to, if you don't want to try a virtual meeting. And you can then take up, for instance, for your elders and deacons who may be going off after 6 years, you can take up the option that the Presbytery gave us last fall and allow those who are serving 6 years to stay on for 1 more year. You need to do that by writing the Committee on Ministry and saying you're taking that option and telling us who is staying on for one more year. But that's if your bylaws don't require a specific time for your annual meeting and you don't have other business that needs to be done. If your bylaws are specific, then you need to try to meet the bylaws as much as possible. If you try and you meet all the requirements of trying and you still can't get a quorum, then you've done your due diligence. But you need to at least try to do that in that way. All right, so you have to try to meet your bylaws. Do your bylaws have provisions for meeting electronically? All right, if they do, I think maybe 5 years ago, we went through for Clerk of Session Day how to add those to your bylaws. And if your clerk brought it back to your session and did that, then you all are all set. You're all set to have a virtual congregational meeting. If your bylaws don't do that, you can still have a congregational meeting, but you're going to have to add one step down the road, not now. And that's called ratification. So this is for those of you who don't have, what I'm going to talk about now for very briefly, is for those of you who don't have a provision in your bylaws to have a virtual or electronic meeting for your congregation. Ratification is a motion that exists under Robert's rules. It's also called a motion to approve or a motion to confirm. And it's used to make an action that's already been taken valid. So if you have a congregational meeting this week, let's say, right, and you don't have provisions in your bylaws for having that, the action is technically taken, but it's not valid. You're going to have to ratify that action later. No meeting is legally valid if it's not meeting your bylaw requirements until it's approved by a congregation at a meeting that meets your bylaw requirements. Right? So that means that at a later meeting, when you can meet face-to-face, you will go back and you will ratify any decisions made between now and that time by your congregation. Same thing would be true for your session. If your session doesn't have provisions in your bylaws for a session meeting virtually. So this is really important for the clerks of session to be aware of, because that means you need to keep track of in your minutes which things need to be brought back to the congregations later for ratification. Ministers should be doing it too, but it's really a clerk's responsibility. All right, so ratification for those not in your bylaws. The other thing to say about ratification is this does not give you complete free range to do anything you want and then later hope it can be ratified. You can only act on and then later ratify actions that are proper. And what I mean by that is if your bylaws say that something has to be done by a private vote, by a ballot, let's say, right? You can't then act on it by a voice vote instead. You have to do it the way your bylaws spell things out, and then you can ratify them later. So again, this is only if your bylaws do not allow you to have a virtual congregational meeting to begin with. Requirements for a virtual meeting are, first of all, they're going to be pretty similar to requirements for a face-to-face meeting. The first of them is notice. You need to follow the notice requirements in your bylaws regarding meetings, all right? Just as you would for a face-to-face meeting. When you get that meeting notice out, you also need, because it's a virtual meeting, to provide the information that's sufficient so that even a technologically challenged member can figure out how to participate. That's really important. So again, this is going to depend on your congregation. You may have a congregation where everybody is technologically swift, and then you just need to put, here's the link, sign on. But if you have people in your congregation that are going to have a hard time, you need to do more than that in your notice. You need to explain to them how they're going to sign on, all right? How they're going to be able to download software, if that's what they're going to do, how they're going to access whatever technology you're going to use, etc. All right, so it needs to be carefully spelled out when you give notice. so that nobody is going to turn around and say to you afterwards, I wanted to participate in the meeting. I had no idea how to get onto it. You didn't make it clear. So notice adds that extra requirement when it's a virtual meeting. The second thing you need to do is around your agenda. Because you will not be face-to-face and passing out physical agendas of some kind, or putting things up or having people ask you questions about what's coming up, you need to provide your members with a way to view an agenda and any other meeting-related documents ahead of time. This can be, you can do it in several ways. You can put it on the screen while you're having the meeting, but that's not necessarily a great thing because it also limits how many of you can see each other if you're looking at like my PowerPoint, right? So even better way to do that is to also either put them on a website ahead of time where they can be accessed on your congregational website. It can be just there for everybody, or you can password protect them as a way to get on, or mail them out, email them out ahead of time, all right? I also want to caution you, if you're putting out an agenda, one of the things that has become very clear from virtual meeting after virtual meeting is if you're putting time on the agenda, we're going to spend 15 minutes on this and 10 minutes on that and so forth. You need to, for a virtual meeting, leave more time per action than if you were doing this face-to-face. Things take longer virtually, partially because people are not comfortable acting virtually on things. And so there's usually a little, well, how do I get this? Or you'll notice when we do a presbytery meeting, for instance, we're now down to doing largely the essential business of the presbytery, only the things that must be acted on, and to keep the meeting to a proper length rather than adding other things. So keep that in mind as you send out an agenda. Polity-wise, you still need to follow all the book of order requirements for a meeting, even though it's virtual. You need to open with prayer. You need to make sure you have a quorum. You need to close. All those things that you've seen in a regular meeting have to happen on screen as well. Nothing changes about the meeting except the way that people are meeting each other. Everything else remains the same for the format of the meeting itself. Technology. At a minimum, your virtual meeting must have the same conditions of opportunity for simultaneous oral communications among members that you would have if you were meeting in a room. So people must be able to ask questions the same way, talk if there's going to be a debate, speak pro or con, and they must be able to hear each other doing that. So there must be that requirement. That's required by Robert's Rules. In its last edition of Robert's Rules, there actually is now an appendix that talks about virtual meetings. And you must have that kind of simultaneous oral communication allowed in order to have a meeting online. So it would be a good idea. You'll notice we do this. Casey is our wizard to do this for our presbytery meetings. It would be a good idea to have a person or persons who are comfortable with whatever technology you're using available to handle your tech needs as you do your meeting. And you may want to give people a chance to either sign on early, like we do for the presbytery meeting. We have people can come on up to an hour early, and if they're having problems, they'll say to Casey, I can't hear you, or I can't see you, and he'll help figure out how to get people on. You may want that, or you may want another day where there's a run through where people can try to get on and answer questions if they've not used whatever technology you're going to use, because the technology has to be working for everybody before you actually start the meeting, all right? And you don't want to be slow down. Now you can do, Robert's Rules allows for you to do your meeting with or without screens, right? And what I mean by that is you can do a meeting using Zoom or Microsoft or Google, whatever kind of virtual meeting you want, or you can do a conference call meeting. Either is okay. If you're doing it virtually, where people have screens, please make sure that people put their proper names up on the screen, so you know that who is a member and who is not. You know who signed on. So don't have somebody sign on and you see their name says my iPad, right? That doesn't help us. My iPad could be anybody. all right, or initials. Have them put their proper name, and you may need to say at the beginning, go up and click on the participant list where your name is and click and change rename, right? If you're doing it as a combination of people with screens and people calling in, you're going to need to ask people whose phone numbers show up who they are and change their numbers to names so that everybody knows who those people are when they're speaking. All right. If you're doing it just by a conference call, the person coordinating the conference call on the one person at least who will be on the computer at that time needs to change each number to a name at the beginning for them so they can call on people by names and say so-and-so is speaking. All right. So that's a very important thing to make sure you do early on in the meeting, and it will take time. So block out your time on the agenda. You also want to encourage people to be, if they're in the same family unit and they're going to be signing on different devices. So for presbytery meetings, for instance, we allow one vote per device. If two people are sitting there, there's one vote on that device. So if one person is on if you have one laptop in a family, laptop, and if they can get on by phone, then. That may mean one person calling in by phone and one person on a screen, but you should be trying to do that. You also will need to take on a virtual meeting special care to do a run through of the meeting with the key players ahead of time. The people who will be coordinating the meeting, the people who will be doing the main speaking on the meeting. You want to do that so that you're sure that all of their microphones are working, so you don't have to try to say to them when they're suddenly speaking, no, do this. You can't hear the moderator or you can't hear the clerk when the clerk is speaking. So you want it for that reason. You may also want to figure out a way ahead of time to privately coordinate with them while the meeting is going on. And in the presbytery meetings, for instance, as an example, I won't speak for Deb or Casey. I don't know how many they have, but I have 7 or 8 different chats going at the same time that we're running the meeting. One with the moderator, one with Casey, one with Deb, one with all of the support staff from the presbytery, one with the moderator and the moderator-elect separately for the two of them hear things. And we're coordinating behind the scenes. That's the only way a virtual meeting runs smoothly. So clerk and moderator at least probably want that kind of coordination. It could be a chat. You may have another way you want to do it, but you should figure that out ahead of time and have that all set before you start your actual virtual meeting.
Susan?
Deb, yeah.
There's a question in the chat around hybrid meetings. Some people by Zoom, some people live.
So a hybrid meeting you need to do, we're going to talk about how to actually vote in a hybrid meeting in a little while, but for actually signing people on, that's fine to have a hybrid meeting. But for the people who are coming on screen, they put their names. For the people who are coming on by phone, you're going to have to put their names. So you're going to have to say, who is 845-341-6473? They're going to have to answer, and then you're going to have to put their names. And that becomes important for when it's time to vote. And we'll talk about how it will be different there. All right. If you're all on one, either virtual or you're all virtually on a screen or you're all without screens, it's slightly easier, but the flexibility of a hybrid is much better for most congregations. And so you're going to do voting in 2 ways if you have a hybrid going on. All right. But you need the names at the beginning. Does that, whoever asked it, does that answer the question you had? I can't see you all, so I can't tell if you're saying yes or no.
Yeah, that's
fine. Okay.
Yeah.
So holding your virtual meeting. Moderator and clerk, your roles remain the same as in a face-to-face meeting. You're going to have, is there a quorum? Opening with prayer, all the things you would normally take and do all the way through. And clerk, your minutes remain the same as well for the meeting. So that's just as a starting point. You need to know who is online. If you have visitors who are not members of the congregation. They're welcome just as they would be to a congregational meeting, but you need to find some way to mark them. So in our presbytery meetings, visitors get either a Z or an X before their name, so that you know if you're voting, how to count votes, who doesn't count in voting. And you need to be clear at the start of the meeting that non-members may observe, but they may not vote and they may not submit questions or comments. All right, so that needs to be said by either the moderator or the clerk at the beginning of the meeting. So everybody is more than welcome, but only members may vote or submit comments. Questions, how to handle questions. You need a process for how you're going to do that. If somebody has a question, what do they do? So you've heard, for instance, our process today is please put a question in the chat, right? You can do that and have somebody monitoring the chats. That's probably not the clerk or the moderator. It's probably somebody else, but that's one way to do it. You can have people raise their virtual hands if people are comfortable doing that. And if they raise their comfortable hands, their virtual hands, you need somebody to watch those. If they're on a phone, that's not going to be a possible thing for them to do, to raise their virtual hand. So how are you going to do that? And when are you going to take those questions? Who's going to keep track of the questions? We do it in several different ways. So you see Deb saying to me periodically, waiting for when I take a breath, and then she says, there's a question at, right? That's one way to do it. During meetings, I actually will interrupt the moderator and say, Mr. Moderator or Madam Moderator, there's a question from so-and-so. If there's a series of questions, I also text the moderator saying we're going to need to stop for a series of questions because they're coming up. So you want to figure that out ahead of time and have a way to alert the moderator that there are questions.
Susan?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask John Miller, please, to unmute and clarify. His question is around having people in person in the sanctuary and on Zoom at the same time.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
that was my question, Susan. When I said hybrid, we actually have live worship, so we may have 30 people in the room, but may have 150 on Zoom, and we're doing both at the same time. That was my question.
Okay. And would everybody be on Zoom but not on a phone, or are we doing a triple hybrid? Phone,
Mostly
Zoom,
just Zoom.
screen?
Just
Okay.
Zoom. Yeah.
Just so everybody will have a screen or be present. Okay.
Yes.
So what you need to do then is have a screen up that shows the people who are speaking the way, so that people in the room can hear them. And then somebody working a camera in the room so that when people are speaking in the room, they can be seen by the people on the Zoom. And if it's done well, it really can be seamless. The first time I saw this working really well was in a Holy Cow training that Michelle was doing at Yorktown. And half the people attending were on Zoom and half were in the room. And they had, in this case, Ben Lowe going around with the camera whenever somebody was speaking and putting the camera right on them so the people on the Zoom screen could see them. And there was a big screen in the front where everybody who was on the Zoom could be seen. And they were told at the front, you're going to be visible by the people sitting in the room. And so when that person was unmuted, which again, you'll need a tech person who will be unmuting the person on the screen, right? Coordinating for questions, they can be seen by the people in the room. And for voting, it will be slightly more complicated, John, because you're going to have both. If it's a ballot vote, you're going to have ballot plus poll, right? And if it's, or you can, if your people in your room are comfortable signing on to Zoom as well, you can have them vote by poll on the Zoom. That's another possibility. All right. Does that, I can't see John, so does that get it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Stepping from the room, there are going to be times when someone needs to be taken out of the room, the way that we would say, all right, you're voting on the increase in the pastor's salary. Would the pastor please leave the room now, right? So you need to have a way to have them step from the room. In Zoom, for instance, we would put somebody who's on the screen in a waiting room, right? And move them to the waiting room. And then after the conversation, bring them back, right? In a conference call, that's not as easy to do. The easiest way to do that is probably to have them hang up and then text them when it's time to call back into the meeting. But you need to have a way in whatever virtual application you're using to have people step from the room whenever there could be an occasion where there would be a conflict of interest for them to be in there. All right. So you should figure that out again before the meeting and explain to people that you're going to be doing it if you know that there's going to be an occasion. So the pastor will step out of the room at this point, and you will instead, he will be brought back in or she will be brought back in later. How to vote. So you need to be prepared for both a voice vote and for a ballot vote. And how you do that is going to depend on whether you're using screens or not using screens. A voice vote can be done for those with screens by having them raise their hand, right, and hold it in front of the screen. It's an easy way to do it. And then you count. For a ballot vote, you can do it by a poll vote, right? And that's a pretty easy way to do it. You used to also be able to use the yes or no buttons, which would be a visible vote. On Zoom, for instance, that has been changed so that the yes or no buttons don't stay up anymore. They're up for a shorter period of time. And so that's not as good an option as a poll vote at this point for the equivalent of a ballot. If you have people who are on phones instead, then what you're going to have to do is do a roll call vote for them. And that there's not a way to do that with privacy. So there's not the equivalent for people on a phone call of having a ballot vote. If you have a hybrid, and here, if that's why I asked John if he had a hybrid that would also have people on a phone, because if you have a hybrid where they're going to have people face to face, you can hand out ballot votes. If you have people who are on a screen, you can do a poll vote. And then for anybody on the phone, you're going to have to say, all right, Kathy Janus, what is your vote? Yes or no? Lynn Dunn, what is your vote? Yes or no? Et cetera, calling name by name. And they're going to have to say yes or no, one after another. It will take time. And so you need to anticipate ahead of time, how many people are you going to have to do a voice vote for? And this is true even if you are doing what would be a hand vote, because the person on a phone cannot put their hand up, right? So for voting, it's a bit more complicated if you're using a phone. At the end, you need a motion to adjourn, just like you would in any other meeting. It's the simple way to end the meeting without a lengthy vote. Simply ask for a motion to adjourn. Once the motion is on the floor, instead of saying how many in favor, how many opposed, ask if anybody objects. All right. Allow a few seconds for objections. And if there aren't any, your virtual meeting is over. All right. So that's the how to do a virtual meeting. Are there other questions on that before we go on to virtual?
Yes, you have a few questions here, Susan.
Okay.
And although we didn't, I'm so grateful for Casey being on here, because Casey, there's a couple questions here, I think, for you as well. But you have a question from Paul Lent. If you have no nominations from the floor for officers, only the nominating committee nominations, can you have the clerk one vote for the slate of officers?
I don't understand the question.
Paul, can you unmute?
Maybe we come back to him.
Yeah. Okay. And with a poll vote, how do we ensure that the people who are voting are members? I think you covered that, correct?
That's by putting a letter in front of the name at the beginning, right? So you can, first of all, you're going to ask them not to vote and hope they won't. But you should be able to see who the Z's or the V's or whatever you're using are. Casey, I'm looking at you. That's correct, right? Yeah. So when you scan through, just don't count them in. Whoever is the clerk or counting the votes or whoever's doing that, you would not count in the ones that are marked. I mean, it can be a number, it can be whatever you want to put in front of the name so that you can quickly scan and see who not to count. We use the reason we use one of the letters is we try to put them all at the end. So if you're scrolling down, when the votes come in, they'll be at the end of the list of names. The catch is if you have to choose a letter that usually don't have people's names. And we discovered at the end of the first Presbytery meeting, we had to look for Zora, for instance, because we were using Z's, and Zora's name came in with all the guests. So we had to pay attention for that. But however you want to code them so that they come up together and you can just quickly say, okay, these people, they thought they voted, they shouldn't have been voting.
So let me try, Paul. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It does mean you have to have a very careful list of members available before you get into your virtual meeting.
Let me try Paul's again. He has terrible internet. So let me see if I can try this again with John's help. If you have no nominations from the floor for officers, only the nominating committee nominations.
Asked for nominations. You've asked for nominations. Have you asked for nominations from the floor? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. You've asked for nominations on the floor, and the only slate you have, you can do one vote. Yes.
And so I'm just trying to figure out as few votes as possible with, you know, God's providence.
So Paul, you would do it in two steps. You would, if there are no nominations from the floor, you would ask if anybody has an objection to voting this as a slate, and give them again a second or two to object. If there are no objections, then the answer is yes, you can do one vote as a slate, but you have to give people a chance to object first, because they may want to vote for, let's say you have 5 people being voted on, they may really want to vote against one of them, even if it leaves a vacancy.
Oh, Lord help us, but okay.
Right. But you have to do it, because there could always be somebody who's going to be cantankerous and decide to object afterwards to the vote if you haven't said, is there any objection to voting this as a slate?
But I'm the cantankerous one, so it's going to be
And I assure you, the Lord will help you, Paul. The Lord has been deeply present in all of our Presbytery meetings. Trust me. We have a question about what exactly is a poll vote. I don't know if Casey can give a short 2-sentence or.
Well, I mean, the poll vote, if you've been on a Presbytery meeting, you would see that it pops up sort of as one of those questionnaires, and you can set a designated amount of time that you would like to keep that open, and then you can close it, and then it'll show you the results of who voted in the affirmative or negative. But I also shared in the chat that if you do a poll vote, it's not accessible for people who are calling in. So you would need to be on a mobile or computer, a mobile device or a computer.
Right, and you can do a poll vote for the bulk of the congregation, but then you have to read the question to the individuals who are on the phone and call them by name. And they need to understand that everybody is going to hear their answer. And you're asking just yes or no, the same way you would for a poll vote. That's what they can say. So by being on a phone instead, and you may want to say this ahead of time, you can sign on by a phone, but your vote will have to be an oral vote in front of everybody if you're on by a phone.
So I'm going to try and interpret Abby's question. I might ask you to unmute and do that, but I'm thinking that Abby is asking for a practice vote right now. Is that right?
That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, some of them are practical, Abby, but I think that yeah, we're looking for a practice.
Can you set up, Casey? Can you set up a poll, or Deb, can you make him co-host and have him set up a poll as we go on? How you'd actually do that is a little different now than it was before, I think. So Zoom is updated. it's where things are a little bit. So are there other questions while Casey's getting a poll ready? Anything else?
And Casey, if it's practical, going back to the practical, or if it's practical, can you narrate what you're doing in order to do that?
You want a live commentary here?
I do, yes. Yes, on the ground reporting.
On the ground reporting. Okay. Actually, I think I could probably share my screen. Do you see the Zoom window?
Sure do.
Okay. So I can navigate to my meetings here on the Presbytery account, and I can click on that. And then if you scroll down, you see that there's the poll option, and there's nothing there yet. So we can create a poll you can title it if you want, such as whatever it is you're voting on. And then you just type your question here. This is my default test question, and if you don't like coffee or tea, I'm very sorry. And then you could keep adding a question, or you just click save. And now if I navigate back to the meeting, you should see the option on the bottom to launch the poll. And if I launch it now, you should see the option pop up on your screen.
I know, Casey, it looks like these are your people.
Are you seeing the result? Oh yeah, because you're I think I'm in good company here.
You're in good company with the coffee, yeah.
And so as you're launching the poll, it'll show how much time has passed. So right now we're on 30 seconds. And then you could end the poll if you would like. And it also tells you the percentage of people who have voted on the poll also.
And now once you end the poll, are you able to share the results? Can you share the
I am
screen?
able to share the results. So you should see the results pop up on your screen. And that's what a sample poll would look like.
Thank
That-
you.
Are we good to go on to virtual
I
ordination?
think we're good to go.
Okay. So
Again, we have a question. Let's reiterate this one more time before you move on. How we have to trust that non-members aren't voting, right?
you should be able to.
The results are anonymous, and we've sort of run through this at the presbytery level as well.
I'm looking. I'm waiting for Casey to answer that because I think he can see who.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, the thing is so we've talked about at the presbytery level, if we're voting with polls, we ask people not to vote if they're not a voting member. But if for some reason, whatever we understand that if there was something we were voting on that was contentious and the vote was close, we could always go back to do a more thorough view of that vote.
Right.
So that's what I would say to
Right.
that.
Right. I think that if you're voting on something where you need to count every last vote so that it's a margin of 52 to 51, I think you have other things that you need to be looking at. I think you have other pieces, and that's how we determined at the presbytery. We are working on folks' honesty. We also reiterate at the beginning of the meeting and at the beginning of the vote that if you are a non-member, you are not to vote here. But again, if you have a very close, and that's determined by you, But if you have a close vote, there are other issues here that you may want to be addressing as well.
Thanks. So let's turn to virtual ordinations and installations. Assuming my cursor will work. It's interesting. So a traditional service has two parts to it for ordination and installation. It has the expectation that those being ordained or installed will answer constitutional questions. That's required by the Book of Order in that section, and that the members of the congregation will give verbal assent. And it also has the physical proximity of laying on of hands, right, for ordination. Those are the two things that come up in a traditional ordination service. The options now before us are, I'll take sort of John Miller's situation first, a blended ordination or installation service. And a blended service would be where those being ordained and installed gather in one place. So if you have a room where you can fit, say, 30 people safely and they're comfortable doing it, they gather in one place with the rest of the congregation participating virtually or electronically. And then the questions and the laying on of hands could be done by those people in the room and broadcast to others. And the congregational members present and those participating virtually would give their affirmation. So you would turn on the microphones of everybody at the time for the congregational response, for the question to the congregation: do we, the members of the Rye Presbyterian Church, accept, you know the question I'm talking about, everybody? You would turn on the mic for that, and they would be able to all say yes or no, right? So that would be in a blended setting where people are comfortable with being ordained, being in the room together in some way.
Susan?
Yes.
Do you need a quorum for a service of ordination installation?
No, you don't need a quorum for the service of ordination and installation. You need, it's not a meeting, it's a service. The quorum will have already voted on these people at a congregational meeting. So that's where you need the quorum. So that's why you could have, if there's just the minister and 3 ruling elders that need to be ordained or installed, they could be the only people in the room. You put them on the screen so that you can hear them answering the question, and then the congregation is on Zoom or I don't care, Google, whatever platform you want to use, and you turn on their mics at the time that you ask the question to the congregation. All right, so the congregation can hear them answer the questions. That's what you're looking for. Everybody hears the answers from those being ordained or installed, and the congregation can hear each other say yes. All right. If you're only going to be virtual, electronic, then using a virtual platform, the constitutional questions can be asked and answered by the ordinands and those being installed with microphones of those people open, right? So the way we said at the beginning, everybody mute yourself, you would say, all people who are about to be installed as elders, please unmute yourself now, right? And we now have the possibility for to be able to put more than one person up on a screen without a webinar setting, to put more than one person up on a screen, so you could spotlight people, right? Members could be spotlighted one-on-one or as different person as each question is asked, or 2 or 3 people at a time to spotlight them as they answer the questions. So you can still do that virtually now for asking the questions. And then again, the microphone would be turned on for everyone when it's time for the congregational affirmation. So either way, you're looking for the chance for everybody to hear the answers from those being installed, and the chance for the congregation to hear each other say, yes, we accept these people. All right. The laying on of hands can be done in several different ways. And there have been lots of creative ways to talk about this. Laying on of hands is a tangible, a visible sign of the person being set aside or blessed or authorized to fully engage in this ordered ministry, right, to which they're being called. That's what you're doing by laying on of hands. And there are various ways to do it. One possibility is to postpone the physical laying on of hands until later and not do anything else in the meanwhile. And the denomination has said that's okay. While we're in this pandemic, if you don't want to do anything at all physical, you can do the rest of the service, the person is ordained, and then later, when it's safe for you all to have somebody go and put on laying on of hands, you will do that for these people. All right. You will notice, for instance, when we will be installing a moderator and a moderator-elect at the January Presbytery meeting, and we will not be doing a physical laying on of hands on that day. We will figure out a way to do that later, physically. All right. That's one possibility. In the meanwhile, or instead, there are several other ways to do that. One is to have at least one person, ideally more if it's safe, present to lay on hands. Again, this could be a small number in the sanctuary. It could be a family member who happens to already be an ordained ruling elder, let's say, lay on hands, because usually you say, all right, all of you who are the ruling elders, will you come up now and put a gentle hand on so-and-so's shoulder or head, or right? If there's somebody that's in their same household who can do that, you can have them do it that way. That becomes a second possibility. People have become very creative as far as sharing a paper or cloth representation of participants' hands. People have traced them and mailed them or scanned them or taken photos of them and printed them out. People have made handprints into stoles in some cases that are actually then given to the person, and they put them on at that point with the handprints. There are lots of different creative ways to visually show the hands of the people who would normally be physically touching. And that is also a completely acceptable way to do a laying on of hands at this point. You can finally, you can do more than one of these, but finally you can also say to people what we do, and we will do this at the Presbytery meeting, please put your hands up on the screen as if you're putting your hands on Dale and Izette's shoulders or head. Please do that at this point as we do the prayer around the installation. All right. So all of these become, any combination of these becomes completely acceptable. All right. So those are ways I've seen different groups doing. You all may know others. I mean, if you do, please share them. But you need those two parts, the questions and the laying on of hands for virtual ordinations or installations. So are there questions around that?
So we have a question from John Miller. Only ruling elders laying on of hands, not family members?
Yeah, technically under the Book of Order, you invite ruling elders to come up to in a normal face-to-face service, right? To do that. You don't say have all family members come up. So what you're looking for is somebody who can play the role of those ruling elders. And so if there's a family member who is a ruling elder, they can play that role on behalf of the congregation in that one way of doing it. There's no reason not to also have family members like if we were doing the installation this month for Dale and Izette, we would say in a normal setting, bring your family and have them come up and stand up there with you as well. So, but that's not the laying on of hands part, is really where ministers and ruling elders come up and put their hands out on.
I am at this moment not seeing other questions, Susan.
Do you all know other ways to do the creative laying on of hands? Does anybody have other things that you've heard of? Or
I did see a lovely rendition of the cutting out of the hands. Every a piece of construction paper was sent to each. Well, in this case, it was a large church, so it was just the session members, the current session members. Everyone was invited to do this, but the current session members did literally trace their hand onto the construction paper and send it back in the envelope, and someone cut them out and put them on a yarn. It was like a piece of yarn, and the pastor held one end, and the person being installed held the other end, and so you saw this lovely rainbow of hands during the service. It was beautiful.
And it's actually in a few of the cases where I've seen almost like a chain. I can't quite explain how they did it, but they took fingers to link around to the next one. So it became a chain the person put around them with the person's hand cut out. And it gave the people a visible reminder afterwards of, yes, you are ordained. You can keep that. And you are ordained in this way. Here are all your colleagues sitting around the session table and their hands on you saying, we're working with you. We're in this together, trying to figure out where we go next as a church. So it can be a really beautiful thing to do. And again, as I said at the beginning, you know your congregation, which thing will be most meaningful for them. And that's what you want to do. And it's not an either or. You can choose to do both. You can do something visible now. And if you want later, when we're all able to be back together, to do a physical touching as well, you can add that. The constitutional questions are what get you started. You must do that piece. So you must have the exchange so that people can hear that people say yes and a chance for them to say yes in response. What I haven't seen, and I looked for this yesterday, and Deb or Casey or anybody else, you may have seen them done this way, is whether you could pre-record people answering the questions and do a Facebook live stream and then have people put for the congregational answer, yes, in the chat. It seems to me, I almost put it down because it seems to me that it would meet the requirements. You're hearing people answer the questions and you're hearing an affirmation, but I haven't seen anybody actually do it. So I don't know if it works well or not. But that would be a way for those of you who are not using something like Zoom, you're using Facebook Live instead to do that.
Okay.
We
Okay.
have 3 more minutes if we need 3 more minutes. Otherwise, we've got it in before 11 o'clock.
So Trisha's asking if the questions can be pre-recorded, the answers can be pre-recorded. They like that idea. She likes that idea. And so what I hear you say, Susan, is as far as we know, it's fine.
Yeah, as far as the Book of Order and the requirements, the answer seems to be yes. And I mean, you could, if you have I know more around this for music, but there's no reason you couldn't, for instance, if you had somebody who was really clever in editing, put everybody up answering the question, right? You would read the question and then you'd see all of them on the screen together saying yes from their homes. And then the next question and yes. And I do with God's help, that kind of answers. And then you would need some way to have the congregation affirm that. That's the harder part. And I think as long as you did it under Facebook Live in the chat, you would be okay. But I've not seen anybody actually do that. I went looking through Facebooks from congregations and from other presbyteries that I know, and I've not seen it done that way. So I don't know how well it works. I think it should work. It meets the denominational requirements. Let me put it that way. I can't promise you how smoothly it goes for the yes, 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 yes. But
okay, so a reminder, folks, if your meeting happens to take place after January 26th, you can watch this or likely participate in this on the Presbytery meeting as we install our new moderators. Again, this has been recorded, so it will be available to you later on today. I know it feels so much better as Presbyterians to do God's work in good and decent order. And so I suspect we can go along on our way and actually do that. So I'd like to thank you, Susan. I know how much work went into this. I appreciate it, and we all appreciate it very much. Casey, you weren't supposed to have to participate, but you always seem to have to participate because it's always about the virtual online questions. You have all of our emails. Please reach out to us with individual questions. And otherwise, do have a blessed day. It's the Lord's day. Go out and go and be who you are. Go be pastors, leaders, and Christians.